It's my massive pleasure to welcome back for a second conversation to the Fine Watches podcast, Max Büsser, the creator and I guess Wizard of Oz behind the MB&F brand. Fantastic to talk to you again. Thank you for joining me.
Likewise, Ben. Likewise. Looking forward to the questions you're going to throw to me.
Awesome. Well, can we kick it off with an industry-wide question? When we last spoke, there was a passing comment. You mentioned that you'd started in watchmaking with Jaeger in the 90s when the industry was virtually dead. And even when we spoke a little over 2 years ago, the industry was in, and I guess continues to be in, a huge renaissance, not only at the top end, but at all price levels. Ongoing price uplift, including in the vintage market, consistent emergence of quality new brands, massive creativity in terms of design and time-telling methods, including from MB&F, Resonance, Urwerk, Chaiken, HYT, and others, and a huge number of growing watch enthusiasts. What do you think is driving this epoch of growth and success?
Okay, let's put it this way. I think there are a certain amount of concurring events at the same time. The growth of the industry in 2021-22 was, I'm going to say, unfortunately, mostly based on speculation. When we became a speculative asset, and I'd never lived that. I don't think anybody had ever lived that. And people were like buying watches like they were buying crypto before the crash. And so basically for all the wrong reasons. And so that just 3, 4, 5 brands got into that. I mean, became the target of that. And that lifted the whole industry because people started getting interested in buying watches, even though they didn't understand anything and they were not actually interested in it. And so that just lifted this enormous wave. And a few of the brands intelligently worked with that, and others just let themselves go up. And when the wave started going down a little bit more than a year ago, there's an old saying, isn't it? It's like when the tide goes down, you see who's swimming with or without their swimming shorts. I think that's really what's happening now. So what we've lived 2021, 22 was completely artificial, had nothing to do with what exactly we're creating as an industry. I feel much more comfortable now, where I feel that the people who are actually interested in buying products in the watch world are much more into it than before. Now, coming back to creativity, the greatest creativity moment was the early 2000s. It was a moment where Orver, Cujon, Richard Mille, UN with the Freak, Vianney, De Bethune, ourselves, we all arrived in a short span of, it's a very short span when you think of it, 5-7 years, we all arrived at that moment. And it was a resurgence. It was a movement. It's like in an artistic movement. No one can create something which is going to make an impact if you're all alone. You need to have other creators who are in the same sort of creative league. So that's exactly what happened. Then there was a more difficult moment where, of course, there was the crisis of 2009, which followed then with this whole back to vintage era, where we were very much still in. And so that was very tough for most creative brands. There was a decade of very difficult. And now in the last couple of years, it's as if it's a new generation when you think of it. It's 20 years. It's a new generation is discovering the fact that you can be creative. You can be a bit crazy. You can create something which is not a copy of what you used to make 50 or 70 years ago. And it's a nice time again, I must admit.
So you've touched there on something that we've discussed on the podcast ad nauseum, those sort of 3 or 4 brands that there was a commercial bubble and everything. But arguably, this renaissance is not just in the creative space; it's commercially as well. So where people are paying $5,000 and $6,000 for a Longines, for example, Omega has uplifted from a $5,000 watch to a $10,000 watch, and so it's throughout the entire industry. And we're talking about 700-year-old machines that sit on your wrist. So do you think that there's something in particular that has caused society to kind of fall in love with these little mechanical machines, however creative they are or status quo they are?
It's probably become more socially acceptable. I mean, I will always remember 37 years ago when I sat next to a guy at university and asked him what he was wearing as a watch, because I was 18 years old and my parents were going to give me 700 francs for my 18th birthday as a watch. And the guy was wearing a Rolex, which was worth, in those days, 4,700 francs. And I gave him absolute hell. What the F is wrong with you spending that sort of money on a watch? I just think it's become socially more acceptable that a watch, it's okay to spend more, and whatever the more is. People say that 20,000 is the new 10,000, or 50,000 is the new 20,000, or 5,000 is the new 2,000. It's interesting. One of your colleagues asked me a couple of weeks ago on an interview, what would be my choice of 3 watches in a global budget of $5,000? I had to, and I was a little bit at a loss. I was actually completely at a loss to buy anything new. If I have to buy 3 watches, it's not 3 watches of 5,000 each. It's all together has to be 5,000. You've got a budget, and I went vintage. I think prices have seriously gone up, but it's also social acceptance. It's like if we just touch on our M.A.D 1, which is 2,900 francs, I remember 2,900 francs being an expensive watch. And when we came out with it, now, of course, we are a brand which is mostly between $100,000 and $200,000. Everybody went wild, like, oh, this is the bargain of the century. Now, I do believe it's really super cool for 2,900, but 2,900 is a lot of money for 99.5% or 9% of the population. It's just become socially acceptable. It's very weird.
It is definitely an interesting development. I've realized that I've forgotten to start with something very important, which we start the pod with. Wrist check. What are you sporting today?
The same watch I've been sporting for the better part of the last year and a half, which is our sequential chronograph created by Stephen McDonnell in the Legacy Machine Evo case. And I've probably not taken off my wrist in the last year and a half since we launched it.
Fabulous. I am sporting a Renaissance Type 5 in the
very cool
the black version. To be honest, I struggled. Do I wear my M.A.D 1, or which you've seen 1,000 times? So I opted not to. And then I thought, what's the only other thing that's kind of worthy of this conversation? And I think certainly in my collection, the Renaissance, which we've discussed before as being a fairly special creation indeed. So
and Benoit is an incredible guy, and his I've been following him since day one, 2010, when he presented his first piece in Basel. We need more people like Benoit Mintiens in this industry.
If I can do a quick promotion, I actually spoke to him as well. And to the listeners, please check that one out as well, because he is also a very, very interesting creator with very similar, I guess, ethos to you, that he's doing what he's doing because he loves what he's doing, not as a purely commercial play. And yeah, he's a very interesting guy. When we last spoke, you mentioned that you felt conflicted because at that time, 2 and a bit years ago, within 16 years, you were releasing your 19th caliber with 7 in the pipeline, which at the time you remarked was remarkable, but you thought it could be better. So I'm curious as to what better meant to you then. Have you achieved it? And is it the same better now?
Look, it's just that I'm an impatient creative addict, we'll call it, an ogre. I don't know what I am. Is that when I started MB&F, just creating my first watch was this humongous achievement. And then the second, and then the third. And it's like an addiction. And like all addictions, if you continue the same dosage, you don't feel anything at some point, and you need to increase the dosage.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't make my life easier, I must admit, but it's thrilling, and it's difficult for the team around me because I just want to create so much. The other issue we all have as watch creators is we're in an industry where you cannot compress time. An R&D of something like we do is going to be any time between 2 and 4 years. The manufacturing of the components of 300, 400, 500, 600 components, hand finish all of them, etc., is going to be between 8 and 18 months. So today I think we've got 8 or 9 calibers in the pipeline. And if I come up with any idea today, my team will just look at me blankly and say, Max, wonderful, so happy, 2032. Like, what? What do you mean 2032? And so that's my life. That's my reality. So not only am I living this insane layer cake where every year we're coming out with 1 new caliber, sometimes 2, and all the other variations and the co-creations and the performance art pieces and all these things we've got going on. So I've got this sort of weird Excel spreadsheet in my head where I have 25 lines, and some of the pieces are just going to come out now. I mean, HM11 is going to be unveiled hopefully in November. That's been a 5-year process. So for me, it's the end. We're arriving at the complete end of it. So I'm going to say I've more or less lost interest in it because I've seen the prototypes working. They're super incredible, and that's it. So that's done. So let's go on to the next one. And so I'm keep on pushing. It's like those Chinese jugglers with plate jugglers. Do you see what I mean? We're on bamboos.
Yeah, keeping the spinning.
Spinning plates, exactly. So you're spinning 1 plate, 2 plates, 3 plates, 4 plates, and just when you think, oh, that's okay now, you look and you see the first plate start wobbling. You're like, oh shoot! Then you run back to that one, and that's my life. So. I love my life. I'm very grateful for the life I have and that I'm able to do all of that. But it's just I'm so impatient and I want to do more and I want to have more bamboos and more plates. That's my life.
So it sounds like the better for you and the essence for you is to creative output. And if I can skip to a question. I read in an interview, which I believe was with Tatler Asia, where there was mention of a shift towards to slow the creation of novelties and instead focus on keeping up with demand for existing pieces. Which to me seems at odds with what you've previously done, because it's always in our last conversation, and in basically any press and conversations with you, you always talk about the drive of creativity. So that move seems at odds with what you've done before. Can you talk about that quote and if it's accurate? And if so, tell me about the thinking about that strategic move to focus on meeting demand with existing models.
So the last 2-3 years have been extraordinary for MB&F in the fact that demand has multiplied. I'm going to see tenfold. Whereas before we had more or less the same amount of customers as the watches which came out, some years maybe 10% more. Now we're at 5 to 10 times the amount of customers for each watch coming out. Something we never dreamt of, something we never worked towards. And in one way, of course, it's extraordinary, is the fact that there is absolutely no more commercial pressure when for 15 years I was traveling around the world, meeting as many people as I could, just trying to predicate and explain what I was trying to do. Because if I didn't do that, we were bankrupt. And so that is fantastic. There is a corollary to that, is that when you've got such long waiting lists on your existing products, nobody wants you to come up with new products. It's like, dude, I've been waiting for 3 years for my LM101 in whatever, steel, white gold, red gold. Why are you continuing to come out with new products? Just make my damn watch. That's what the customer tells you. So you realize clearly we have to maybe ramp up a little bit the amount of pieces we're planning. So let's put it that about in 2019, 72% of our pieces created that year were novelties, and 28% were the existing collection. Now we're closer to 60% is the existing collection and 40% is novelties. So what we're trying to do is increase a little bit every year more the existing collection. And now again, we crafted in 2021 278 watches, which is exactly what we were crafting in 2013. So my pledge not to grow the company for 8-9 years actually stood. And so last year we went from 278 to 345. And this year we're trying 420, but we'll probably hit 400 at the best. And those extra 50, 60 watches are novelties. And so we're coming out with 1 new caliber or 2 new calibers a year. And we have at any given time now, and we were just looking at that last week, I think we've got 9 calibers in production, over 400 watches. That is economically totally stupid, because that is, let's see, my maths are still not trusted, about 45 watches per caliber per year. That makes no sense at all. What we should do is go down to 2 or 3 calibers and make 150 of each. But gosh, that's so not what I want. That's so not what my company stands for. That's so not what makes our team love working here. So yeah, at some point we're going to have to stop existing products, even though they're and that's another thing we're discussing now. How do we stop a product where there's 5 years waiting list until people have been waiting for years? Well, you know what? We're just not going to make it anymore. And they're going to go bananas on us. And we're like, well, sorry, we can't, because if we don't stop something, we can't come up with something new. And that's the whole point of MB&F, is to create. So this is, as I've often said, this has never been a business. And I don't want to drive this as a business. So some people are going to have to live with the fact that even though they've been waiting for some time, we're going to stop products, which is very, very weird. So the challenges we had for the first 15 years are transforming into completely different challenges in the last 2-3 years. And that's what makes life interesting for us, at least.
I guess that where that story surprised me was that my understanding of it is very, very common in the art world to do limited runs. So some artists create a single piece, and then most commonly, I guess, in 2D art, there's a limited run of prints or photography or whatever. And that was always my understanding of how you guys worked, which MB&F worked, which was, there's X number of these, and once they're sold out, you have to get the next one, kind of thing. So yeah, I guess that was an interesting thing, that there was this concentration on fulfilling the back demand for what you do.
But what happened, if I may, I'll just interrupt, is
sure.
that we used to be on a limited edition business model, meaning we would announce 25 of these or 35 of these or 50 of those, and it would take us whatever months or years to sell them. When the demand went bananas, we couldn't do that anymore, because we ended up having 500 or 1,000 people screaming at us because they were trying to get those 25 or 30 pieces. And so we said, okay, you know what, we're going to a non-limited edition version where it's a question of time. You will have it, but bear with us. We're not just telling 95% of the customers, you can't get it. It's like, it'll take a few years. And now this is coming to bite us, because we have to stop those pieces. They have been waiting, and well, now we've got another issue. We've just basically pushed the issue further on, but we're learning as we're doing.
I think a very good example of the demand outstripping supply, I would assume that that's probably greatest with the M.A.D 1 editions. Would that be true to say that the number of
the ratio of demand towards production is by far the highest on the M.A.D 1, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So despite the fact that it's not an MB&F and it's branded differently, I think that despite the fact that since we last spoke, there have been awards, incredible new releases in the main body of work, and other milestones, including the establishment of the M.A.D house headquarters in Switzerland and so on, which I want to ask you a couple of questions about separately. I think the M.A.D 1 is in some ways the most remarkable, simply in terms of the fact that it's almost unheard of that a haute manufacture organization, whether haute horology, couture, whatever, would release something that sits so far outside of its normal price bracket. And so I'm interested to know what your thoughts were in deciding to create that piece, and I guess how you and the team reconciled its position and effect on the MB&F brand.
So there are multiple reasons again which brought this product or idea to the surface. The first one is I come from a middle-class family, middle-class friends. And after so many years of now being successful at creating the pieces I dreamt of at MB&F, I should be incredibly happy. But there was a big dark hole, which was that nobody around me, of my friends or family, could ever afford anything I do. So what's the point of what you do if the people you love can't actually have it? So there's always been in the back of my mind, I want to create something the people I love can actually afford. And the M.A.D 1, as you see it today, was actually created in 2014. Engineered in 2014. It took us 7 years to find the courage to actually launch it, because, of course, no super high-end brand, hand-finished, crafting 20 watches a month would ever go and do an industrial product at 2,900 francs. Everybody knows you should not be doing that. And there's another thing which kicked in, is the fact that I was talking about adrenaline and being an addict. This addiction is very much linked to taking risks. And because the ultimate goal at MB&F is to be proud. That's what powers us all in the team. We want to be proud of what we do as human beings, as creators, as entrepreneurs. Now, you are only proud when you take risks. You're not very proud when it's easy. So that was one of the ultimate risks. That was one of those boxes we put on the side going, no, we can't do that. That is insane. That is jumping out of a plane without a parachute sort of thing. And there's a moment when COVID hit and we were all blocked at home and everything was closed. Our retails were closed, our suppliers were closed, we were closed. We were all on Zooms saying, how are we going to survive this? And somebody said, well, we've got this product in the pipeline. What? We're not going to launch a new watch brand when the world is disintegrating. And then a couple of months later, we noticed that our world was not disintegrating for sure. On the contrary, suddenly demand went completely crazy. As I said, it was mid-2020s. The demand shot up. And then we're like, well, wow, okay, well, it was back in the front of our mind. Let's do it. Let's go nuts. There's a very interesting book I read 10 years ago called Different from Young Moon. She's a Harvard professor, and she writes about creativity, innovation. It's a very small book, very easy to read. It's like 100 pages. And there's this one phrase which really resonated with us. The reception you get when you create a groundbreaking new product or idea which is going to change your world or change the world is exactly the same as when you have a really, really, really dumb idea which is going to bankrupt your company. So our challenge when we come up with all these crazy ideas is are we actually really going to harm ourselves, or are we going to do something great where we're going to be proud of it in the years to come? And I was saying a few weeks ago again on this other podcast, I realized that my job in the company is to put the company in danger. My job is to push ideas, concepts, products which no employee in his right mind could actually do because it's not his or her company. So M.A.D. was one of those ideas. Let's go nuts. Let's take a risk. Now we mitigated the risk saying we're going to only do a couple of 100 pieces just for our friends. And then the world went bananas and everybody wanted it. And then we're like, okay, so now the fans, of course, want it. And I get that. So now we have to come up with a few more. And I've always said this is not going to be a business. This is not something which is going to disrupt MB&F. It's going to be a side project. So we're trying to keep it as much a side project as we can. If we listen to the market, we should basically be much bigger than MB&F. But no way, we do not want that. So we're keeping it on the side. And we've got many, many other ideas coming out. I mean, for the moment, you've only seen the M.A.D. But it's opened up another gateway for me as a creator is creating products at 2,900 francs, which is a completely different way of creating, by the way. When I create an MB&F, price, cost has no matter. Whatever it's going to cost is going to cost. And then we're like, okay, well, that's the retail. When you've got that goal of doing something cool and crazy and fun and all that, but you've only got such a small budget in cost, is a whole other process. And that's actually become another part of my life, which I've never known. And it's really fun. I really enjoy it.
I guess it represents a completely different challenge in that if you're creating with zero budget limitations, the sky's the limit. But when you're creating something that needs to have a Miyota movement versus in-house and all that, then there are certain challenges that you don't have. It's interesting because it's been met with basically universally excellent reception, both from the press, which includes people who specifically admit there's no way I can afford an MB&F, but this is as close as it gets and I'm happy with it, which in my own collection I can reflect. But also, interestingly, collectors of high-end watches who post to social media have also come out and said, I love this thing, alongside the other product from Max Büsser that cost me 10 times as much, which I think is telling. And it's fun. It's definitely fun to wear. There's no doubt about that. So
it's a big smile on everybody's face, I think. And a lot of people who own M.A.D ones have told me that it gets the most discussion about all the watches they wear. They're like, when I wear this, people just actually come up to me and start talking to me like, excuse me, what is that? So it's like the ultimate icebreaker. And it makes me super happy. You create products, and then the life they lead is not yours anymore. It's like your children. You create children, and you do as best as you can to bring them up, and then they go out in the wild and have their own life. That's exactly what happens for us.
I think the other thing is that last time we discussed that brand is actually something external to the activity of a company. It's actually, the strict definition is what the market thinks of your company. And I think that the thing that I guess you would take great pride in or pleasure from is the fact that there is recognition with the M.A.D one that you and the organization sought to make something special accessible, which in itself is admirable, because not all luxury companies go, okay, let's give something of quality to people who can afford it. They just create on a commercial level. So I thought that was interesting.
Thank you.
Talking about changes within the organization, tell us about M.A.D House, or is it M.A.D House, M.A.D House? How did you end up there, and how has that changed the way that the organization works?
Oh, for sure, it has changed a lot of things in our company, in our team. So we've been looking since, I think, 2019. We started looking for new premises because we just didn't have any space in our previous premises, which were just like boring offices. And we'd been there for a better part of 10 years. And everything I visited, because we wanted to stay in the center of Geneva if possible, was these big open space plateaus. And they were just so depressing. So I visited for a year and a half all these boring places. And one day I'm visiting one in Carouge, which is in the outskirts of Geneva. And it's the same big, boring plateau. And the real estate gentleman took us showed us that there was two entrances to this building. And while we're at the second entrance, he's looking at me and says, so what do you think? I'm like, oh, gosh, sorry. And I see just the other side of the fence, there's this forest with this old, like, manor house. And I more or less jokingly tell him, you know what? That's what I want. That's what I want for the company. I want something with character, cachet, a little bit quirky, not these big plateaus. It's not us. And instead of just shrugging and going on with his life, he looked at me and he said, seriously? I'm like, yeah. He said, oh, maybe something can be done. What are you talking about? And it appears that the owner of the building I was visiting owns like the whole place where it was and owns that old house. And so we went to visit. And when we visited, we were like, this is no, this is impossible, because there hadn't been anything done to this house for over 50, 60 years. It was a pretty poor condition. And we were just a little bit aghast, like, no, this was just a romantic dream. This is never going to happen. We can't enter that place. And so we continued looking for other spaces, and we continued seeing boring other spaces. And one day, Serge Kriknoff, our technical director, my partner in the company for the last 15 years, looked at me and said, look, why don't we go and see that old house again? Seriously? He said, yeah. So we went, but we went with an idea of what could we do with it instead of what is it? And we started thinking, yeah, maybe something is possible. Make a long story short, a year and a half later, we entered in September last year. We've done a lot of work into it. And the immediate energy, which I saw the level of energy in the team change, first of all, because it's such a nice place to work in, and it's like a house. So, everybody's about work at home. Well, we work at home in the house. We come to the house, and it's actually a nicer place than most people live in. So you're in a place which is practically 120 years old, with this great vibe. Also, we managed finally to bring everybody together, because we were on all sorts of different places. The whole team was never together, so that also changed a lot. And yeah, it's like a beehive. It's like this super energized beehive where everybody seems to be really happy to work. And I never actually thought of how a workplace can influence. It's not about putting a foosball or a table tennis table to make it cool. We don't even have the space for that. We'd love to, but we don't. It's just the place itself and the people themselves, because I had the people, I just didn't have the place. Now it's actually together.
I noticed in one of the videos that I saw of their house that there's all sorts of decorations, and actually behind you over your right shoulder there is the Destination Moon rocket from Tintin. Right. And throughout some of your creations, both the watches and probably more explicitly some of the other works, there have been these touches of these popular cultural icons. So one of the simplest one is the Destination Moon is fairly reminiscent of that Tintin rocket.
Of course.
The music machines, Star Wars, Star Trek, The Fifth Element, Godfather, James Bond. And I noticed in the video of the Madhouse, you have both a framed image and a large figurine of UFO Robo Grandizer. Tell me about that. How do you select the cultural icons that you include in your works? And
they're very much the ones. Sorry, they're very much the ones I lived through. I mean, that's what pop culture is about. It's what made me happy, or my heart beat faster when I was a kid than when I was a young adult. And as we go, it grows. And you're absolutely right. I mean, look, I've got behind me here, I've got a model of the Messerschmitt KR car, three-wheeler. And I will always remember the entry scene of Terry Gilliam's film called Brazil. That was 30 years ago, and I think I saw that film probably 5 times, with the music of the Brazil. And you've got Jonathan Pryce in his little Messerschmitt bubble car. And that hit me. That I was probably, I don't know, 18, 20. I was like, wow, this is so cool. And there you go. And I've got it behind me. Have I done anything with it yet? No. But that's where, and you're going to see in our Madhouse, a lot of the cultural references we have are of creators which changed, I'm not going to say the world or their world. They they were trailblazers. They were, I mean, if you take the Grandizer, if you look at Grandizer today, it's pretty lame, honestly. I tried to show my kids Grandizer. They looked at me like 6 and 10, I'm like, seriously? And but when it came out, the first Transformer robot in the 70s, when I was a kid, that was insane. That was so cool. So I think those things which mark us, they really they brand us. You talk about branding like on cows and in cowboys. That's what we are. We're branded, and that becomes our personal brand as we grow up. Is what influenced us when we were youngsters, and that is very much what we let loose at MB&F. Is everything which made us amazed. We try and create through it, and it's amazing a new generation. I get so many messages. One this morning was really made me happy of an alumni of my school. So I left my school 37 years ago. And a young 21-year-old just wrote to me like, I'm an alumni of the school. I'm not sorry, a university school. And we love what you do, and I love watches, and can I come and visit it? And because MB&F is so cool. So maybe that youngster today, when in this case, he sees a bulldog or a thunderbolt or something like that, that will influence him in 20 or 30 years to do something else. That's how the world works.
How do you reconcile that experience that you were looking at? I forget the mangaka who did Grandizer, but say Katsuhiro Otomo who did Akira or whatever, and people like that must get this experience of people coming and go, oh, I wanted to become a mangaka, so da 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 da. Like, how do you reconcile that experience of having a new generation of people come to you and go, wow, like you are my idol?
It's always very difficult with a Calvinistic upbringing to deal with praise and people telling you that they love what you do, I must admit. But on another level, I think what's most important is that a little more than 2 years ago, we sat down with a few of the team to define the why of MB&F. Why does this company exist? For me, it was very clear. I just want to be proud. Pride has been basically my driving reason of creating MB&F. But we're close to 50 now in the team, and it has to be. I mean, I really believe everybody's proud, but it can't be about just us being proud. It has to be something larger than that. So we sat down, and everybody was writing on Post-its and putting them on the wall what they thought the why of the company was. And very, very quickly, it took not even 20 minutes, and I was expecting it to last like 4 hours. We all very quickly decided the why of MB&F is to inspire people to think differently, is to inspire people to take risks, is to inspire people to be more creative. And that was like this wow moment of all of us. Like, yes, that's why we do what we do. And we can say that today because of the body of work we've created in the last 18 years, because this body of work has been created with virtually no means, with incredibly strong human values, and we've proven it actually works. So if you look at us and see what we've managed to do with no means and really strong values, maybe in your world, whatever it is, you could do something which would make you proud and with strong values and be as creative and think differently and take risks. And so as much as watchmaking is an incredibly defining part of my life and is what saved my life, it's interesting that in our why, there is no watchmaking. In our why, it's inspiring people to take risks, to be more creative. So coming back to what you're saying, when people come to us and say, wow, this is incredible, it's changed the way I see watchmaking or see anything, we're doing right by our why.
It certainly from the accolades and the way that people talk about MB&F and your work, it's certainly clear that's being achieved. A couple of weeks ago, maybe a little longer, you posted an amazing house by Lautner. I am also a massive fan of architecture. I think it's like watchmaking in the way that you do it. It's the perfect mix of practicality and art as a vehicle to create an experience. And I think that Lautner's work reminds me of very much of MB&F in that his houses are typically very striking, typically instantly recognizable as a Lautner. And they use their environment and materials to create something that elicits what could loosely be described as awe. Last time we spoke, we played a little game about car brands. So if you can indulge me, can we play the same game with architects? Personally, I think both Lautner and Zaha Hadid might work as analogous architects for MB&F. But I'm wondering if there are any architects, past or present, whose work you think represents something close to what MB&F does.
I think you resumed it incredibly well. You summarized it well. I tend to love, and it's interesting that if I'm not wrong, Lautner, when he came out in his initial works in the early 50s and mid 50s to late 50s, was not recognized. And it took like the late 60s and mostly Hollywood films to bring him on the scene. And then way later, I remember the Brian De Palma film where one of his that house is actually featured, and that was probably the 80s. I was like, whoa, that's amazing.
And a Bond house, one of the Bond films as well, has a Lautner.
Also,
yeah.
And you realize that in a world of practicality, nothing makes you happy in buying something practical. You buy a washing machine, a dishwasher, there is not much joy in that. I'm not saying it's a bad product, just like there is no joy in that. Buy a toaster, okay, it's going to make toast. But buy a really cool design toaster, maybe you'll have a little bit more joy. Maybe it'll put that ray of sunshine in your kitchen if it's a really cool design toaster. An espresso machine, it can be a cube, or it can be something which has been designed which looks like a sculpture, a mechanical work of art, which is in your kitchen. So when creators transcend something which is practical and make it into something which makes your heart beat faster, be it because you hate it or you love it, but at least going to generate some sort of reaction, that's of course where we sit. Now, coming back to the architects, it's interesting because you're going to see in November an incredibly important product come out, which is influenced by architecture for the first time. And it's very much influenced by, I'm going to say, the mid to late 60s organic architecture, whereas instead of having blocks of, when we were rebuilding Europe after the Second World War, everything was practical. I mean, we didn't have the luxury of doing something which looked cool. We needed to make homes for all these people who had lost their homes. And so we all had these skyscrapers and blocks, and unfortunately we have to live with these damn things today, 60, 70 years later. And there's a current in the late 60s, which is as much in design, architecture, furniture design, where a certain amount of individuals start creating something which is completely different. And so I'm not going to go further on that, but you're going to see, and we'll explain that in November, how that really amazed me 5 to 10 years ago, and I started designing a timepiece influenced by that. It's trailblazers. I mean, for those who've, of course, read The Fountainhead, and I'm not talking of all the political stuff which has gone around that novel. I'm saying about the novel, The Fountainhead, about this architect who doesn't care about what everybody wants and what sells and what people are ready to put money in. He creates the houses the way he believes a house should look. And for decades, he has no success at all, until at some point, some people start latching on, going, that's amazing. That really is amazing. And that you see that whole process over 1,200 pages. It's an incredible novel. It's a novel which is, in a way, really influenced me, and the fact of this architect who doesn't give a damn if anybody actually is going to like his house, if anybody's going to buy his house. He creates what he believes is his ideal house. And it's those individuals in architecture, in design, in art, which have modeled the world we live in, not those who wanted to please.
So I guess listeners will have to wait till November to perhaps know which architect is fits the bill. I'm aware of time. I like to finish up traditionally on talking about grails. Last time you mentioned a Derek Pratt pocket watch and a number of pieces from F.P. Journe. So I asked, do these still stand as your grails? Have you obtained either, or have your grail pieces changed?
I think part of the reason a grail exists is that you cannot achieve it. So I believe grails have to remain grails. And if you're, yes, of course, I would love to have a Ferrari 250 GT Lusso or a short wheelbase. That was never going to happen. It doesn't stop me from thinking, wow, those are so beautiful. So yeah, it's I think it's incredibly healthy not to be able to afford what you love. Not everything, because you need to have a little bit of what you love. But I see a few individuals who've got so much means that they can buy anything they want, and they have no pleasure. There is that little tingle of pleasure when they get the object they can buy, and then in 20 seconds or 20 minutes later, it's gone because it was easy.
Yeah.
So no, it shouldn't be easy. It should what's impossible should remain unachievable.
Fantastic. As usual, a deeply considered answer. And for the second edition of Max Büsser on the Fine Watches podcast, another fascinating conversation. And thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure.